Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
James stared at the text message on his phone, his hand trembling. His world felt like it was collapsing. The words on the screen burned into his mind. I saw Becky with another man. They were kissing. I'm so sorry, James. The message was from his mother. James struggled to breathe, his chest tight with disbelief. How could Becky do this? To him, to their family. The sound of the front door opening and closing snapped him back to the moment. Becky was home. His heart pounded as he rose from the couch, determination mixing with dread. He needed answers. Becky walked into the living room, her cheerful expression fading the instant she saw James's face. "What's wrong?" she asked, concern coloring her voice. James held up his phone, his voice barely a whisper. "Is it true?" he asked, trying to keep his emotions under control. Becky's face turned pale, her eyes widening with fear. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. But James could see the guilt etched into her expression. "Don't lie to me," James shouted, his voice reverberating through the room, making Becky flinch. The weight of years of trust and love seemed to shatter with his words. "My mom saw you," he continued, his voice breaking. "She saw you kissing another man. How could you do this to me? To our kids?" Tears streamed down Becky's face, her voice trembling as she tried to speak. "James, I can explain," she pleaded, desperation clear in her tone. James let out a bitter laugh, devoid of joy. It was a sound filled with pain, disbelief, and a heartbreak too deep for words. "Explain," James demanded, his voice raw and trembling. "Explain how you broke our wedding vows, how you threw away our whole life together." His voice cracked on the last word, the weight of his emotions threatening to crush him. Becky sank onto the couch, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her words muffled by her tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." James paced the room, his anger growing with every step. The walls seemed to close in on him, suffocating and oppressive. "Who is he?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "Do I know him?" Becky shook her head, avoiding his eyes. "No," she murmured. "You don't know him. He's someone I met at work." "Do you love him?" James asked, the question twisting in his throat. He dreaded the answer, but needed to hear it. Becky hesitated, her silence louder than words. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. I have feelings for him," she admitted, each word a dagger to James's heart. "But I don't love him, not like I love you." The confession hit James like a blow to the stomach. The room spun, and he clutched the back of a chair to steady himself. "If you love me," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "you wouldn't have done this." Hours passed as they talked, argued, and cried. The sun set and rose again, but neither noticed. Becky tried to explain her actions, her voice breaking as she spoke of loneliness and feeling unappreciated. She described how James's long hours at work had left her isolated, how she had begun to doubt whether he still loved her. James couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had always thought they had a good life together, a life they had built with love, effort, and sacrifice. They had 3 wonderful children, Emma, the youngest at 12, Jack, 15, and Lily, 17. Their home was in a great neighborhood, and both he and Becky had successful careers. How could Becky throw all of it away? "I worked those long hours for us," James said, his voice hoarse from talking through the night, "to give you and the kids everything you wanted. How could you think I didn't love you?" Becky wiped at her ruined makeup, fresh tears streaking her cheeks. "I know you love me, James. But love isn't just about providing. It's about being there, really being present. When was the last time we had a real conversation that wasn't about the kids or the bills?" James opened his mouth to protest, but then stopped. He couldn't remember. As the sun rose, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, James made a decision. "I'm going to talk to a lawyer," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion but firm with resolve. "I need to know what my options are." Becky's eyes widened, and fresh tears began to spill. "Are you going to divorce me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," James admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "But I need to protect myself and our kids." The next day, after a sleepless night, James sat across from a lawyer. The news wasn't what he wanted to hear. Janet, a kind-faced woman with a calm demeanor, laid out the reality. "Because you've been married for so long and have children together, a divorce will be complicated and expensive," she explained. "There's a strong chance you'll have to pay alimony, and you'll need to divide all your marital assets." James leaned forward, frustration and disbelief clear on his face. But she's the one who cheated. Janet nodded sympathetically. I understand, James, and that's something we can raise in court, but the division of assets and spousal support doesn't always depend on fault in most states. The court will focus on the length of your marriage, your financial situation, and what's best for your children. The weight of her words settled heavily on James's shoulders. It felt unfair. He had stayed faithful, worked hard for his family, and sacrificed so much. Yet the system seemed indifferent to that. As he left the lawyer's office, his mind was racing. He knew the road ahead would be painful and complicated, but he also knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let this destroy him or his relationship with his kids. James protested, a fresh wave of anger surging through him. Janet nodded with a sympathetic expression. I understand, James, she said gently, but in the eyes of the law, that doesn't always matter as much as we think it should. The court's primary concern will be the welfare of your children. When James returned home, he found Becky sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen from crying. He relayed what the lawyer had told him, watching as her face crumpled, tears spilling once more. How can you do this to me? She cried, her voice rising in hysteria. You're ruining my life. James stared at her, disbelief and fury bubbling to the surface. The unfairness of her accusation hit him like a tidal wave, threatening to overwhelm him. I'm ruining your life? He shouted, his composure finally shattering. You're the one who cheated. What about our kids? Did you think about how this would affect them? Becky wiped her tears, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her actions had finally pressed her into defeat. She looked down, unable to meet his gaze. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't want to hurt anyone. James shook his head, his anger simmering but tempered by exhaustion. But you did, he said, his voice quieter but no less intense. You hurt all of us. And now we have to live with the consequences. The room fell into a heavy silence, both of them sitting on opposite ends of the emotional chasm that had opened between them, unsure if it could ever be bridged. Of course I thought about them, Becky said quietly, her voice laced with sorrow. That's why I want to fix this. Can't we try to work it out? For the kids? James wanted to say no. Every part of him screamed to pack his bags and leave, to never look back. But as he opened his mouth to refuse, his gaze fell on a family photo on the mantel. It was from their last vacation, all 5 of them smiling on a sunlit beach, their faces filled with happiness. His children's joyful expressions seemed to plead with him, and his resolve wavered. He thought about his kids, how sad and confused they would be if he left. He imagined Lily, about to start her senior year of high school, trying to focus on college applications while dealing with the collapse of her family. He thought of Jack, already struggling with the pressures of being a teenager, now facing the added burden of their divorce. And little Emma, still so young and innocent, not understanding why her daddy wouldn't be living at home anymore. After what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes, James spoke. We can try counseling, he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. But I'm not making any promises. Becky's face brightened with hope, but James raised his hand to stop her before she could speak. This doesn't mean I forgive you, he said firmly. And it doesn't mean we're okay. It just means I'm willing to try. For the kids' sake. Over the next few weeks, James and Becky attended marriage counseling. At first, it was difficult. They argued frequently, revisiting old wounds and resentments. James still carried anger and feelings of betrayal, while Becky fluctuated between defensive anger and tearful regret. But gradually, things began to improve, thanks to the guidance of their patient counselor, Dr. Reynolds. Dr. Reynolds worked with James and Becky to create a safe space where they could express their feelings without fear of being dismissed or attacked. Through her patient guidance, they learned to communicate with empathy rather than frustration. Instead of shouting over each other, they began to listen, truly listen, to the pain in each other's voices. As they dug deeper into the roots of their problems, it became clear that their issues went beyond the affair. The cracks in their marriage had been forming over time, unnoticed or ignored, until they became a wide chasm that neither knew how to cross. James, driven by his desire to provide for his family, had poured himself into his job, often working long hours, taking on extra projects, and focusing on financial stability. He believed that by providing material security, he was showing his love for Becky and the kids. But in doing so, he had unknowingly distanced himself from them emotionally. He didn't take time to connect with Becky in meaningful ways. No quiet moments together, no spontaneous gestures of affection, no deep conversations about their dreams and fears. He hadn't recognized that, beyond the bills and responsibilities, Becky needed more than just financial stability. She needed emotional closeness and reassurance that she was valued, not just as a partner, but as an individual. Becky, on the other hand, had begun to feel increasingly neglected. She had spent years trying to be the supportive wife and mother, putting her needs aside for the sake of the family. But as time passed, she began to feel invisible, unappreciated. The little things, simple conversations, shared laughter, or even just a warm touch, became scarce. As James became more consumed by his work, Becky began to feel alone in their marriage, unsure of her place in it. The emotional distance grew, and with it, a sense of resentment. In the absence of the attention and affection she craved, Becky began to seek validation elsewhere. The affair wasn't just about the other man. It was about Becky's longing for someone to see her, to make her feel valued and loved again. It was a desperate attempt to fill the emotional void she had been living with for so long. While Dr. Reynolds never justified Becky's actions, she helped James see that his own neglect had played a significant role in the breakdown of their connection. James began to understand that love wasn't just about providing. It was also about being emotionally present, about nurturing the bond they had once shared. As painful as it was to confront these truths, it forced both of them to acknowledge how their individual choices had contributed to the unraveling of their marriage. It was a painful but necessary step toward healing. For a while, it seemed like James and Becky were on the right path. They were talking more, truly listening to each other, and making a conscious effort to rebuild their marriage. They even started having date nights again, something they hadn't done in years. They would leave the kids with James's mom and enjoy a quiet dinner or catch a movie together. The moments of connection, the small gestures, the effort to rekindle what had once brought them together. Things were better, at least on the surface. But even as they worked to rebuild trust and restore the love that had been shattered, something inside James had changed. He couldn't forget what Becky had done. The betrayal was too profound, too raw. It wasn't something that could be wiped away by a few nights out or a couple of heartfelt conversations. The wound ran too deep. Every time Becky was late coming home from work, a knot twisted in James's stomach. He wondered if she was with someone else, if the same pattern was starting to repeat itself. When her phone buzzed with a text message, he had to fight the intense urge to grab it, to see who was messaging her, to confirm his suspicions. His trust in her had been broken, and no matter how hard he tried, it was hard to ignore the doubts that lingered in the back of his mind. The trust wasn't there anymore, and deep down, James wasn't sure if it ever would be. His mom, seeing the pain James was carrying, urged him to leave Becky. During their weekly phone calls, she would tell him, "She broke your heart once. She'll do it again. You deserve better than this, James." Each time, James felt the weight of her words, her concern for him, and part of him agreed. He deserved peace, stability, and trust. But another part of him resisted. James didn't want to break up his family. He loved his kids deeply and couldn't bear the thought of them growing up in a broken home. He remembered his own parents' divorce, the emotional fallout, the feeling of being caught in the middle, the sense of loss and confusion that followed. He hadn't been ready for that pain as a child, and he couldn't fathom putting his own children through the same heartache. The idea of disrupting their world, of causing them that same level of hurt, made James hesitate, even as his own heart ached. He was stuck, caught between the pain of betrayal and the love he had for his children. Every day, he tried to reconcile the two conflicting emotions, but he didn't know how to move forward. The pain was still there, and though he was trying to forgive Becky, the scars from what she had done lingered, haunting him with every step they took toward rebuilding. James made a difficult decision. He would stay with Becky until their youngest child, Emma, turned 18 and went off to college. After that, he planned to leave. It wasn't an ideal situation, but he believed it was the best thing for his kids. He wanted to provide them with a stable home and two parents under one roof for as long as possible. The years passed slowly. James and Becky lived together, but their relationship was never the same. They were like two strangers sharing a house, going through the motions of marriage without any of the love or intimacy that had once defined their bond. They focused on caring for the kids, maintaining a sense of normalcy in the home, but the love and trust between them had been irrevocably lost. James poured himself into his children's lives, determined to be the best father he could be. He never missed a soccer game or a school play, helped with homework, taught them to drive, and was always there to listen or offer a shoulder to cry on. Becky, too, did her best to be a good mother. She baked cookies for bake sales, chaperoned school dances, and worked hard to create a warm and loving home. Yet, there was always a sadness in her eyes, a lingering regret that never quite faded. The kids, perceptive as they were, sensed the tension between their parents. Lily, the oldest, once asked James why he and Mom never kissed anymore. James hesitated, struggling to find the right words. Finally, he said, "Sometimes grown-ups show love in different ways." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was the only one he could give, one that tried to shield his children from the deeper truth of their fractured family. James wasn't sure if Becky truly believed him, but after what felt like an eternity, the day finally arrived. Emma, their youngest, was heading off to college. As they helped her settle into her dorm room, James felt a whirlwind of emotions. Pride for his daughter, sadness at this new chapter in his life coming to a close, but also a sense of relief. He had kept his promise to stay for the kids, and now it was time to focus on himself. That evening, after returning home from dropping Emma off, James sat down with Becky at the kitchen table, the same one where they had shared countless family dinners over the years. The house felt eerily quiet without the sounds of the children. "I'm leaving," James said, his voice calm but resolute. "I stayed all these years for the kids, but I can't do it anymore." Becky's face crumpled as tears welled up in her eyes. "Please, James," she begged, her voice trembling. "We can start over now that the kids are gone. We can focus on us. We can fall in love again." James shook his head slowly, his sadness evident. "I'm sorry, Becky, but I don't think I can ever trust you again. And without trust, there can't be love," Becky cried, pleading with him. But James had already made up his mind. The next day, he packed his things and moved out. It was hard, far harder than James had ever imagined, but he knew it was the right thing to do. The kids were devastated when they found out, unable to grasp why their parents were splitting up now after so many years. James sat them down and tried to explain as best he could. He told them he loved them deeply and that he had stayed all those years because he wanted to be there for them. He assured them that, even though he and their mom weren't together anymore, they would always be a family. Over time, the kids began to understand. They saw that their dad was happier now, that he smiled more and seemed more at ease. They still spent plenty of time with him, and their bond grew even stronger. James was there for every important moment. Lily's law school graduation, Jack's wedding, Emma's first art show. He became a constant presence in their lives, a rock they could always rely on. James learned that being alone didn't mean being lonely. He had his kids, his friends, and his work. He started to do things he enjoyed but had long given up. He picked up painting again, finding solace in the sweep of a brush across the canvas. He joined a hiking club, rediscovering his love for nature and adventure. For the first time in years, he felt truly happy. Becky, on the other hand, struggled more with the divorce. She had thought that James's presence in their marriage meant they could work through anything, that staying together was a testament to their love. The reality of the separation hit her hard, and she found it difficult to let go of the past. She tried to stay active and busy, attending events and social gatherings, but the loneliness and regret lingered. It wasn't just the end of their relationship. It was the loss of a shared life and all the dreams she had built with James. Despite her efforts to move forward, she often found herself wishing things could have turned out differently. James would stay forever, even though things weren't good between them. Becky realized too late how much she had hurt him and how much she had lost because of her mistake. She went to therapy, trying to understand why she had risked everything for a brief affair. It was a long, painful process, but slowly, she began to heal. The journey was difficult, filled with moments of self-reflection and regret. But over the years, Becky grew into a better version of herself, learning to accept her flaws and mistakes. As time passed, James's children grew up and had families of their own. He became a wonderful grandfather, always there for his grandkids with a smile, a hug, and a funny story. His children, despite the pain of the past, respected and loved him deeply for the sacrifice he had made by staying in an unhappy marriage for their sake. They saw in him an example of true strength, resilience, and love. To them, his actions spoke louder than words, showing the depth of his commitment to family. One day, as James sat on his porch with his oldest son, Jack, watching his grandkids play in the yard, Jack asked him a question that had been on his mind for years. "Dad, do you regret staying with Mom all those years?" James paused for a moment, looking out at the children laughing and playing, then shook his head. "No," he said, a small smile on his face. "It was hard. Probably the hardest thing I've ever done. But I gotta see you kids every day. I gotta be there for all the important moments in your lives. That was worth everything to me." As James looked at his son, now a grown man with kids of his own, he realized that the decision he had made, even in the face of heartbreak and sacrifice, had given him the chance to be there for his children when they needed him most. And that, in the end, was more valuable than anything else. James felt a deep sense of pride as he reflected on everything he had endured. He had made it through the hardest period of his life and kept the promise he made to his children. Though his marriage had ended, he had found happiness again. James understood that life didn't always offer the perfect endings like in the movies. Sometimes, mistakes were made that couldn't be undone, and sometimes love wasn't enough to keep two people together. But he also knew that even in the most difficult times, there could be moments of joy and love. He had found those moments with his children and grandchildren, and that was enough for him. As he hugged his son goodbye and watched him leave with his own family, James felt a sense of peace. He had learned that true strength wasn't about avoiding hurt. It was about rising after being knocked down and doing the right thing, even when it was the hardest choice. In the end, that was exactly what he had done. James went back inside his house, closing the door on the setting sun. He picked up a framed photo of his kids and grandkids, smiling at their happy faces. He might not have gotten the fairy tale ending he once dreamed of, but he had something just as valuable, a life filled with love, respect, and the comfort of knowing he had always done his best for the people who mattered most. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.